there was no way. I mean, that lit the DIY fire in me, and I was like, no, you don't. We'll have a crack at this. Hey folks, welcome back. It's the Big Barn Build. Today, it's a bit of a reveal. We're gonna have a look at our polished concrete floor for the first time, and I'm gonna be sharing with you some of the costs and the details and the pros and cons of what we did. So stick around and you'll get to find out all. Now, first of all, if you haven't caught up with the last video, you would have seen that we've managed to get our walls boarded in the garden room. So this these two bays of the barn become like a garden room covered patio type thing. We have got glazing there going in the future where that temporary sheeting is, but it kind of sits just outside of the house, so conservatory plus. Anyway, this is our first look at the polished concrete floor. This is a power floated finish, which basically means that it is the same finish as the day it was installed, and that was all done, the whole building, one day, one team of guys, and they finished it with power floats, big ride-on power floats, and this is how it was left. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what options there are as far as the finish goes, and of course when we come to actually polish and grind this, there'll be even more to share. But the main thing for today is to share with you the thought process about why we went for it and what were the costs involved. Right, first up, excuse the state of it at the moment. Yes, we peeled it back, but it's still kind of drying out because there was rain that had blown in, there's dust and dirt everywhere. And what we'll end up with is kind of a satin finished, marbly looking slab. So it won't be ground down and exposing the aggregate like a terrazzo floor or something like that. It will stay this sort of swirly finish, and that's what we preferred, because otherwise it can look a little bit too busy. Anyway, this is what is known as a colour hardened floor, and I'll try and give you a bit of a look at why we did that and what the difference is. Right, it's not going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be. I was hoping to find like a piece of concrete that had broken off the edge of the slab. There we go, that might do it. Which would show you what this would look like if we just got it straight out of the lorry and polished it and gone with the default colour, which concrete is, which in our area tends to be sort of a bluey grey, quite a cool industrial looking concrete, which is fine. And if you're in that sort of space, that sort of design, that's all well and good. But we wanted that slightly warmer tone, a little bit lighter. So we decided to use a colour hardener, which is a dry shake. That is a top layer that is installed and put onto the concrete as it's being floated. And basically, by doing that, you're kind of colouring just the top fraction of the surface. So I haven't really got a macro lens on me, but I'll show you a little offcut. I'm not sure how well this is going to look, but if I hold that little shard of snapped off concrete there, you can see that is our stone buff colour, which we put on there. And if I flip it over, which is only 5mm thick, that is the typical bluey grey. Don't know how well that's showing up in the light, but I promise you, it's warmer, sandier, and nicer. Now, don't go nodding off already. I am going to go into the costs of this in a minute, but I just wanted to explain why we went this route first. So the colour hardener is installed on the top, and if you could look close enough, you can see it on there. It's about, well, 2 or 3mm. It's coloured on there. So you're laying it on top, and it's being mixed in, worked into the surface. That does two things. It does what it says on the tin, really. It colour hardens it. So it's colouring the top. It's basically got its own aggregate and stuff in it. If you mix up a bag of that on its own, it would go hard. It is not just dye. And then in addition to that, it is giving that sort of harder surface to it. So it's almost like a crust on top, but you want to make sure that it bonds and it becomes part of the 150mm slab, not just on top. So that is one of the biggest risks of a dry shake colour hardener, is that you can have delamination. At the end of this video, I'm going to share with you a small disaster that happened. Right, next, why did we go with the polished concrete floor? Well, in reality, it kind of makes sense. It's a bit of a no-brainer, in as much as with this size building, everything becomes expensive as far as materials go, because even if you go for the cheapest option, you still got to buy a lot of it. So for us, we've got to put this concrete down anyway. It is our structural slab. It's 150 mil thick. The original structural engineers' drawings or architects' drawings were for 100 mil slab, ground bearing slab throughout. On top of that, we would have then put our insulation and poured a self-leveling type screed. And we could have done that, and that would have been fine. But for us, going for a polished concrete floor, it made sense to put that polished concrete on top of the insulation. So our insulation, 150 mil of it is sat on our sand blinding, on top of a DPM. Then we've put all of our underfloor heating in within this 150 mil thick concrete. So as we had to put the concrete there anyway, have we spent any more money? Well, we paid a bit more because we needed it to be power floated. That takes us one step closer to being polished. But really, if you were going to get a nice flat, smooth floor in here, they'd probably put the power floats over it, just maybe not in so much precision. So what is the extra expense? Well, I've explained the colour hardener. So we've coloured the floor. I had to buy colour hardener for that, and it wasn't that cheap. It was £20 a bag, and I think we used about £2,000 worth. Sounds a lot of money, but if you were to buy tile for this garden room, you would have spent more than £2,000, probably 60 square metres in here. So already, even if we decided that we didn't like it throughout the whole building and we were just going to leave it in this garden room and maybe in the kitchen or in the annex over the other side or in the utility, already, even if we just lived with it for 2 or 3 rooms, we've saved money. If we're happy with the finish after we polished it and done the work throughout the building, yes, we might still carpet the odd room, like the snug in the corner and obviously upstairs, but we will have saved ourselves a lot of money and time because we're not having to do heaps of flooring. I think on one of our estimates, which we had run right at the beginning off plan, it was something like £20,000 of labour for a tiler on this build, which obviously we're not going to pay. But if you were to tile through there, regardless of what materials you're using, it was an awful lot of labour. So this, hopefully, especially if we can do the polishing and finishing and sealing ourselves, should have saved us some money. So let's jump into how much it really has saved. All right, it's not ideal lighting, but I thought I'd move away from the garden room, mix it up a bit. It's even dustier in here. However, this is another room which we've now pulled back. This is still a little bit darker because it had moisture on it from rain and stuff that was sat on here. We've pulled it off now, and within another day or two, it should have dried down to the same sort of point as the other room. So let me tell you the biggest misconception about polished concrete. It's no cheaper. What I've said to you previously in this video is kind of irrelevant if you're paying someone to do it. Polished concrete usually works out more expensive than actually having a finished floor with tile or wood. So I had 3 quotes from polished concrete floor companies because I thought we may as well get a quote. They would then be responsible for installing it, colouring it, finishing it, and maybe it was worth getting someone else to do it because we were always going to pay a team to come in and actually do the main pour. So I've averaged our quotes. I don't know which way to do this. Do I tell you the quote for the polished concrete floor company first or what we paid? I think I'll tell you what we paid first. For us to get this concrete slab poured, 150 millimetres thick, 540 square metres, even if we were going to lay flooring on top of it, even if we were going to just do a structural slab and then insulate on top of it, whatever it was, local companies were around 35 to 40 something pounds a square metre, depending on the mix of concrete, what pump you were using, and just how they were going to break it up, whether it was going to be done in one day, etc. We ended up going with Nick and his team, who I imagine you've seen back in our concrete videos, who did an amazing job. And we agreed with them that what they were going to provide for us is a power floated finish like they would do if it was an industrial unit or a grain store or something like that, which is what a lot of their work is, as well as domestic work that they do. The main thing that attracted us to using a company like that is actually they're used to doing a big pour like this in one day. They got the kit to do it and the team to do it. It's not like using a local builder who might be able to do an amazing, extension slab but actually having the ability to coordinate 10 lorries of concrete on one day and pump, and the knowledge and timing and power floats and all that, it was well worth going with a bigger company. So we spent, I think it was about 18,000 on that initial concrete, finished concrete slab. It's a lot of money, but over this size, actually, it's, you know, it is what it is. Now, the other thing that we had to bear in mind is we wanted to add some fibres. We possibly didn't need to because we had all the steel in here, but we did, and it was only the 2 days before, we decided to add fibres. There were two different types of fibres. Whether or not we went for the wrong, we went for the stuff that makes it really strong. We've got some lumps of concrete from when they cleared out the trucks outside, and I cannot break them, even with a pecker on the digger. What that does is the small cracks, it stops sort of the hairline cracks and things like that, but also it eradicates the need for rebar in some cases. Nick was saying that a lot of yards and barns and stuff now, there's no rebar in there. It's all just this fibre. So we went for the fibre. It added on £2,000 because, well, I guess it's a specialist product, and also there's a lot of it in here. I'll share with you some of the downsides of that at the end of this video. Our total cost for our concrete to be put in, as well as the £2,000 of colour hardener we had to buy to colour it, came to a smidge over £20,000, which in our case for our square meterage ended up at £37 per square metre. £37 a square metre gives us almost a finished floor. But as soon as you start using specialists who deal with polished concrete, it gets a whole lot weird. And well, I'm not quite sure why, but I'm sure there is good reason, and maybe the levels of tolerance are a whole lot different. But bearing in mind we spent 37, sorry, excuse the clipboard here, £37 a square metre on our flooring. Yes, we've got to use a machine to hone the top. It's not grinding too much off it, but we've got to go over it with a rotary grinder, and then some of the sealers and stuff involved to seal and harden, finish the floor. I had no idea. We need to look at it, but it's certainly not going to be a crazy amount, and we also already know someone with one of the machines. They're going to lend it to us. But that takes it to, let's say, just over £40 a square metre. But that's our finished floor. That's it done. But remember, that also includes our structural slab that other people would have had to pay to go underneath. Now, let me jump to some of the quotes that we had for polished concrete floor companies. Now, a polished concrete floor company would have done exactly what Nick did. They would have coordinated the pouring of the slab. They might have done a little bit more of the prep at the beginning. We did all the myothene around the outside, although that was an extra if we were going to get them to do it. So we did all that prep, but a polished concrete floor company might do a little bit more rather than just rocking up on the day. However, really, they were going to be offering the same in as much as it was going to be 100, well, actually, all their quotes were 100 mil, so it'd be more expensive than this, but 100 mil of concrete was going to be poured, and then they were going to power float it, colour harden it, cover it, so they would have had to provide all the floor covering to seal and cure it, and then they would have had to return several weeks or months later to grind the floor and apply all the sealers. But wait for it. This is some of the quotes that I had. I had a £111,000 quote. One was 115, and another one that was a London outfit, which was even higher. And remember, that wasn't even for 150 mil of concrete, that was just for 100 mil. And yes, they were going to be coming back and doing the grinding and the polishing and the sealing. But at that rate, on our square meterage, it was coming in at over £204 per square metre to provide us with a polished concrete floor slab. I mean, Italian marble might have been cheaper. I get it. Maybe if you're just doing a rear extension or a kitchen or something in the city and you want them to come in, and it might cost £10,000, £20,000. So perhaps this scale of build, it throws the figures a bit, but there was no way. I mean, that lit the DIY fire in me, and I was like, no, you don't. We'll have a crack at this. So even if this went horribly wrong, we could tile it or carpet it or wood floor and still have saved £100,000. No, not £100,000. probably £80,000. I don't know. You tell me. Maybe I'm missing something. But bearing in mind we're going to be about £40 a square metre all in, with the slab, fully polished, fully sealed and usable, and hopefully all the heating and everything. It's good. I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. All right, let's get back in the light and let me share with you a few of the pros and cons. So I've left it too late in the day. It's getting gloomy already. I want to share with you some of the negatives or downsides perhaps of a polished concrete floor, even though this isn't quite at that point yet. One is the limited amount of colours available. It's either the sort of really white sandy tones or paler like this, or lots of blues and dark greys and graphite sort of colours. And I guess they are the sort of colours that you would associate with a concrete or stone floor. But you're more than likely going to carry that same colour throughout the house. So you perhaps have less ability to have interest in the floor without using rugs and things like that, because it's more than likely going to be the same colour taken through. We considered this patio area being done in a different colour, but I'm glad we didn't, because actually by the time the floats are coming on and off and things being shoveled around, it would have, because you're dusting the dry shake on and they're working it in, you'd then be treading it, because you have to walk in it a little bit, you'd be treading it over. It would probably have been a bit of a mess. So you need to commit to a colour, and that is going to go through your whole house. I don't know if that's a downside or not, but for us, we just said, let's go neutral, but something a bit warmer, and this sort of swirly, marbled effect, and then we'll take it through the whole building, and then we'll add interest with rugs and maybe a couple of rooms, like I said, we'll carpet. Negative number 2 is the fact that we went with the fibres in here, and when you're using fibres, normally the dry shake you put on top suppresses the fibres from being at the top and poking through, but you do have fibres sticking through the top of the slab in a few areas that will need to be torched off. They just shrivel down when you hit them with a blowtorch. But those bits, I don't know if we're going to be grinding deep enough to take them out. I'll try and do a bit of close-up in a minute. So you just get a little, when you're power floating it, the fibre spins around and like almost helicopters surface a tiny bit. We went with a fibre which was very strong, probably too strong. So rather than really wispy hair type fibres, which we had on a screed at the old house, these ones are quite substantial and perhaps not the right fibre for the job. Even though we've got a super solid floor, they're going to be harder to melt off and disguise, but we'll see. It might be that by the time we get to the grinding, they all disappear and we never notice them again. And then I mentioned it earlier, the dry shake, the delamination risk, which is very true and apparent. It did happen. I'm going to take you over to the annex now, where we had the first, or the main bit happen, and that happened during the power floating stage, and I will also share with you the time lapse of me applying the dry shake, and you'll see exactly why it happened. Dry shake needs to be applied at, I can't remember what the square metre is, was it 4 kilograms a square metre, something like that. A fair amount needs to be applied, but it has to be done at the right time and not too much. If you don't put enough, then it just mixes in and you don't really see the difference in colour. If it's a lighter colour that you're adding, you need to put a little bit more of it. The guys that we used at Hatcrete, they supplied the stuff and they were really informative over the phone and gave us all the guidance. But if you put too much down, you suck all the moisture out of the slab as it's curing, and when the power float was going, it just kind of pulled, only really late at night, pulled the top sort of few millimetres off in one chunk. We had to sweep it to the side and just had to park it, because as soon as you start working around the area, it could get worse. Touch wood. There is no more of that that's happened. The only other bits we've seen is just when you tap in a couple of places the day after, it sounded a little bit like there might be a bit of hollow, well not hollow, but it just sounded a little bit like delamination had occurred. There is a certain sound that concrete should make. Chances are I'm not going to be able to spot them now. There you go, that sounds a tiny little crack there. Well, before we cover it up, look how good that looks. With a bit of water on it, you can kind of begin to see how good the finish is already, even though it's still got a lot of work to to diamond polish and stuff, it sorts stuff out in the future. But like I mentioned earlier, even if a few areas failed and we floor those rooms or carpet them or do something different, or strategically placed rug, we've still saved ourselves a lot of money and time. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a floor which we're really happy with, and we can't wait to get to the point where we can grind it back, polish it and seal it. And obviously there'll be videos on that. But as far as the money goes, well, yes, it was a lot of money to spend, but if we weren't doing polished concrete, we would have still spent that, because the concrete has to go down, that slab has to go down there. Unless we were doing block and beam or timber suspended floors, might have ended up spending the same amount anyway. So with our £20,000 that we spent versus the 115 or more £1,000 from some of the more artisan companies, I think we did ourselves a favour by trying it, and hopefully it's going to help some of you. If anyone is interested, they might just want to do it for a garage, because at the end of the day, a lot of garages end up with a brushed or roughly tamped floor. Maybe just go the extra step and get it either colour hardened or just power floated, and you end up with a finish which is far more maintainable. I mean, in the future, if we want to open our doors to a few orphan lambs in here, for example, I haven't run that past Joe yet, but if anything, just dogs coming in and out, or not having to worry about your hardwood floors being scratched, I think it's going to be quite a robust thing. Obviously, concrete cracks, there's no getting around it. Even with all the rebar that we've put in there, all the preparation, the fibre, the control joins, that's why there's a bit of moisture here, because it's obviously got a bit of moisture sat in the crack. That will be, once it's polished, that'll be filled with a colour match sealant. But even with all those precautions taken, it's likely that we're still going to end up with a few cracks. Most of those cracks just add to the patina on the floor. I don't think there'll be more the hairline cracks, but there might just be the odd crack that comes off a doorway or something. But hopefully we've predicted the sites of any cracking and put those joints in. Those joints you probably won't even notice them as much, because they're going to be colour matched and they're in sensible places between doors and joins and under walls. But there is that. So don't think that you're going to have an absolute seamless floor. But even if you were going to have a porcelain tiled floor, now and then cracks happen and you might have to replace the tile. In the case of concrete, I don't know what you do. Maybe you can carefully fill it with something coloured and buff it up, but in reality you probably leave it. But there we go, life's a lesson. Hope you enjoyed us sharing with you the concrete side of things when it was going down, but now you've got to see the facts and figures, you can kind of see where we got to and why we got to this point of going with polished concrete. And at the end of the day, folks, it's just a building, and if it had all gone horribly wrong and we weren't happy with the finish, we could have just tiled it. Right, completely forgot to film the disaster zone. So if I remember rightly, it's around here. There it is. Now Nick, our concrete contractor, will be upset that I even showed this, but it wasn't his fault. As I've shown in the time lapse, this is where I just absolutely ploughed in the dry shake. So what you're seeing here is, I mean, it's worse than it is because we picked at it and found the hard edge. So that's as far as it is going to go. But this area here is the concrete slab. So that's just pure concrete. And the thickness of that is pretty much the thickness of the dry shake material that is colour hardened the top surface. So what happened is we applied far too much of the dry shake in this area, because I think I had the bags somewhere near here and I was just ended up throwing it over the same area. And because of that, it probably just sucked out too much moisture all at once. And as the blades of the power float went over, it just pulled almost like plates of the top of the slab off. So we just said, well, we'll just leave it, this whole area, and we'll revisit it. But there we go. That's what happens when you overdo it on your dry shake. Over here, absolutely fine. You can tap that with a hammer and it just sounds like one solid concrete slab. So I don't think there's any more to go. I've even had a bolster against that. It must have just been this area. So that was the risk we went into the project knowing about. and that's what it looks like when you have delamination. Thankfully, not the end of the world, happened in a good place for us. And I think I found another sort of hollowy sounding bit there, but we'll just put a nice table over the top of there. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself. We'll see you next time.